The defense forces have liberated the village of Kucheriv Yar in the Donetsk region. The General Staff published a video showing Ukrainian paratroopers raising the blue and yellow flag on one of the destroyed buildings. The settlement was deoccupied by the Ukrainian armed forces as part of the Dobropillia operation, with paratroopers also replenishing Ukraine's exchange fund. Ukrainian drone operators thinned out the enemy's artillery ranks, delivering precise strikes against Russian units on one section of the front, destroying a Grad multiple rocket launcher system and 2 cannons. Since the beginning of the day, there have been 56 combat engagements on the front line. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the Russian army attempted to advance 10 times in the Alexandrovsk direction. Ukrainian defenders also continue to hold their positions in the Konstantinivka sector of the front, where they have repelled 5 Russian assaults since the beginning of the day. The defense forces repelled the same number of enemy attacks on the Slavyansk bridgehead in the areas of 4 settlements.
The enemy has become more active on the Zaporizhia front. However, this suggests that the Russians are trying to create another hotspot and distract our attention from the Pokrovsk and Dobropillia direction. Dnipro direction. The enemy is not attacking as actively, but in the information space, they've already claimed to have crossed to the right bank, I want to point out. Accordingly, we understand perfectly well that all of this is just Russian information warfare. They have no successes, no advances at all.
The situation remains most difficult in the Pokrovsk direction. According to the Ukrainian military command, since the beginning of the day, fighting of varying intensity has broken out there 20 times. The Russian army stormed the positions of the defense forces in the areas of 8 settlements.
In Pokrovsk, it's a well-known fact that sabotage groups broke through all the way to the railroad, where they were destroyed. Well, and in Kupiansk, there are also battles going on in the center. They managed to capture the north and northwest, and the fighting is very intense. In other areas, generally speaking, well, there are some isolated successes by special operations forces, for example, against armored vehicle columns, about 30 units.
Over the past day, Ukrainian defense forces eliminated 1,050 Russian occupiers. In total, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, since the start of the full-scale invasion, Russia has lost more than 1,133,000 soldiers. In addition, as reported by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, 2 tanks, 11 armored combat vehicles, and 12 artillery systems were destroyed yesterday. Ukrainian defenders have also taken down 160 Russian drones.
Let's discuss the situation at the front with our guest today. Vladislav Seleznev, military expert. Vladislav, welcome to the Freedom Broadcast.
Glory to Ukraine.
Glory to the heroes. Vladislav, every day we discuss the situation at the front, and in particular, the Pokrovsk direction as the most intense one. How do you assess everything that's been happening there lately? Is the dynamic in this direction changing in any way? Because previously, we discussed that certain political events might have some influence. But at the same time, it's interesting to know, given what's happening in the world right now, how does that affect or not affect one of the hottest spots on the front?
I believe that any diplomatic tracks have absolutely no impact on the situation on the battlefield, and especially not on the Pokrovsk direction. Let me explain why. For the Russian army, it is extremely important to achieve the objective for which the so-called special military operation was launched back in February 2022. We're talking about the complete occupation of the entire Donetsk region. Accordingly, for the Russian army to achieve this objective, at one stage of this process, Putin's army needs to take full control of Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad. That's exactly why there are so many clashes, up to 30, even 40% of all combat engagements happening along the entire front in a single day are concentrated specifically in Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad. The situation there remains quite difficult. The dynamics are due to the fact that the enemy has concentrated, according to various estimates, between 110 to 130,000 of its troops in this sector of the front, and is constantly working to ensure stable, uninterrupted, and full logistics for the units operating in this area. And in fact, the logic of the occupiers' actions hasn't changed in any way over the past few months. After realizing the futility of their attempts at frontal assaults or so-called meat assaults on our positions near Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad, they are now trying to use two tactics in this sector of the front. In one case, they used the so-called infiltration tactic, slipping through our defensive lines into the depths of the settlement, operating in small and even ultra-small infantry groups, sometimes with as few as 2 people in each group. The second tactic is that they expand the area of semi-encirclement or partial encirclement of our defenders who are located within these settlements, aiming to cut off key logistical routes that currently supply our forces operating there. Basically, the enemy's logic is absolutely clear. Resources are a key factor that affects the situation on the battlefield, and taking key logistical routes under fire control will significantly complicate the actions of Ukrainian defense forces in the defense of Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad. It's a difficult situation. All military observers and analysts who closely follow the developments around Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad acknowledge this. Nevertheless, fierce fighting has been going on in this section of the front for over a year now. They are drawing a huge number of Russian forces and resources to themselves. Yes, more and more frequently, enemy sabotage and reconnaissance groups are being detected right in the settlement itself. Accordingly, in turn, Ukrainian defense forces are operating as well. By conducting search and raid operations, they identify these Russian assault troops and eliminate them.
Vladislav, tell me, there was earlier information that Putin's Federation, Russia, is preparing some kind of large-scale offensive operation, or is trying to carry out its plans somewhere, at least as it sees them, with implementation in the fall and winter of 2025 to 2026. Do you see any signs or prerequisites for this? Or basically, are they just sticking to the directions they've already chosen, trying to push through somewhere, as you said, by changing tactics, slipping through in places where they manage to and where such opportunities arise?
Yes, absolutely. They are constantly looking for weak spots in the Ukrainian defense, and it's precisely in these areas of the front that they concentrate the maximum number of their forces and resources. I still believe that in the coming months, the enemy will focus its efforts not only on the Pokrovsk-Myrnohrad direction, but will also direct a significant portion of its forces and resources to the south of the Zaporizhia region. Certain developments on the battlefield in the Orikhiv direction near Stepnohursk, as well as in the Heliopol direction, give me grounds to make this claim. Yes, of course, the enemy is trying to carry out Vladimir Putin's plan and intention by force of arms, occupying Ukrainian territories. But the Ukrainian army, in turn, has also seriously prepared for such active operations, such activities from the Russian army. That's why the enemy has very far-reaching and large-scale plans. But when it comes to actually carrying them out, there are certain problems, because the resilience of our defense, in fact, amazes many experts who are closely watching this process. The most important element, in my opinion, that allows us to maintain this resilience, apart from the courage and heroism of our soldiers, is the resource support for our forces and assets. Just a few days ago, I had the opportunity to speak with a serviceman from the Ukrainian Defense Forces who is carrying out missions in the south of the Zaporizhia region. He assured me that over the past few weeks, not only has the pace and intensity of artillery fire by Ukrainian units increased significantly, but also he emphasized that this work is practically happening around the clock, 24/7. The key point is that there are resources, there are artillery shells, which allow us to carry out effective counter battery operations, artillery duels, and accordingly provide fire support for our units that are carrying out defensive tasks. This is actually good news, because when we have the means, the enemy doesn't have a single chance to make any significant advances into the depths of our defensive lines and positions.
The situation at the front, but it would be strange to assume that the war started by Russia would not affect Russia itself, I mean territorially. And it's interesting to discuss with you that Russia has already admitted that they can't cope with the attacks by Ukraine's defense forces on oil refineries in Russia. So, in response, the Russian Ministry of Defense has decided to bring in reservists to guard these facilities. We're talking about Russians who voluntarily signed a contract to be in the mobilization reserve. First and foremost, they'll be trying to shoot down Ukrainian drones. We know that Russia is unable to protect its oil refineries. Honestly, we understood that even without their admission. We know this, in fact, from how effective the strikes on Russian oil refineries have been. But still, this idea with reservists. How effective could it actually be, and how much could it complicate strikes on Russian oil refineries?
The enemy is constantly looking for additional forces, means, and resources. First and foremost, they're interested in manpower, which is obvious since the Russian death toll is steadily moving toward the 2 million. That is, more than 1,100,000 Russian servicemen have already been killed or have suffered catastrophic injuries. Accordingly, the enemy needs manpower, including to ensure the security or survivability of facilities located deep within Russian territory itself. Using reservists, to some extent, will allow them to create a kind of security perimeter around those facilities that are extremely important to the enemy in terms of their integrity. How quickly this case will be implemented is hard for me to say, because in addition to the personnel who will be performing security and defense functions at these sites, the appropriate equipment is also needed: electronic warfare systems, air and missile defense systems, and those same mobile fire groups. In other words, the enemy currently faces quite a few tasks, since the territory of the Russian Federation is vast. There are quite a few sites that need to be protected, and no one knows when, at what moment, or at which specific site the sanctions policy, which I call General Vassal Maliek's sanctions, will be directed next. That's why it's clear they have plenty of problems in this area. Will they manage to create and deploy, well, an effective defense system for those very sites that have been constantly getting hit in Russia lately? It's hard to say. After all, the war is very dynamic, quite adaptive, and I wouldn't risk betting on who will come out on top in this context. But I am sure that deep strikes carried out by the Ukrainian defense forces will only increase, and their effectiveness will continue to amaze the whole world.
Vladislav, you know, there's news coming in about our partners supporting Ukraine. And here they're talking about aviation, right? About transferring aircraft to Ukraine. What's your comment on this? About the number you know, yes. And what kind of tasks we'll be able to accomplish with these aircraft? Today I even caught myself thinking, you know, well, if we're talking about how many? 100, right? How many? Remind us, please, Vladislav.
100, 150.
Yes, 100, 150 aircraft capable of carrying out the tasks needed by the armed forces of Ukraine. But it's not just about the numbers, right? Not just about the hardware. But as I understand it, this also means there are people, right, who are not only able to fly, but also to service, receive, and so on.
Colleagues, about a year and a half ago on the Freedom TV channel, we recalled a statement at the beginning by the spokesperson of the Air Force Command of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Colonel Yuri. Then this statement was confirmed by our president, Volodymyr Zelensky. At that time, it was said that for the complete rearmament of the Ukrainian Air Force, we would need at least 130 modern aircraft. Now we're hearing numbers like 100, 150. So, in fact, thanks to our Swedish friends and partners, we will receive a very significant component that will greatly strengthen the aviation potential of the armed forces of Ukraine. This is, without a doubt, a very important factor, because without effective fire support, it is extremely difficult to talk about full-scale and effective counteroffensive actions. Pay attention to how nervously and anxiously the Russians react to the facts of deep strikes that are constantly happening on the territory of the temporarily occupied Crimean Peninsula. It's obvious that they understand the logic behind the actions of the Ukrainian defense forces, because by knocking out the air and missile defense systems in this way, we are shaping the future battlefield, where aviation will undoubtedly play the leading role in providing support for the actions of the Ukrainian ground forces and assets. That's why I believe that in the long term, receiving modern aircraft capable of performing a wide range of tasks, both in air defense and in supporting the actions of Ukrainian ground forces and assets, is undoubtedly good news. God willing, may we all make it through this journey and achieve the very result where we will be able to destroy the enemy more effectively.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Joining us on Freedom today, Vladislav Seleznev was with us, military expert.
Subscribe to UATV English and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.